We begin our journey in the sweltering midsummer of 1914, deep within the echoing, cavernous halls of the lavish Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, the opulent and glittering heart of the Russian Empire, where Tsar Nicholas II paces the polished mahogany floors in a state of restless, suffocating anxiety while staring intensely at a massive, hand-painted map of his territories that stretches across the entire length of a gilded wall. Nicholas sighs deeply, a heavy sound that seems to carry the crushing weight of an entire continent, and he mutters bitterly to himself under his breath about how incredibly exhausting and impossible it is to rule an empire that spans across 11 separate time zones, encompassing vast frozen tundras, untamed Siberian wildernesses, and teeming urban centers, especially when his own people are actively starving in the streets, striking in the factories, and desperately begging the crown for basic worker rights, human dignity, and bread. The air inside the imperial study is thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and impending doom, a sharp contrast to the absolute luxury of the Romanov court, where crystal chandeliers catch the dimming, Baltic light, and gold leaf molding frames, a reality that is completely detached from the misery of the working class outside the palace gates. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors are flung open with a violent crash, shattering the tense silence, and his chief military advisor bursts into the room. Gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, and clutching a stack of urgent, freshly decoded telegraphs with trembling hands as he shouts that a catastrophic geopolitical crisis has just broken out in the turbulent Balkans because Austria-Hungary has issued an ultimatum and is now actively threatening the sovereignty of Serbia. Nicholas stops his pacing, turning slowly with an expression of supreme aristocratic detachment, and he calmly holds up a single manicured hand to silence the frantic officer. Completely dismissing the internal chaos, the mass strikes, and the bloody civilian protests that have been tearing his own country apart for months, with an air of absolute unshakable confidence that borders on delusion, the Tsar declares that the honor of Holy Russia is non-negotiable, that they must defend their Orthodox Slavic brothers against foreign aggression at all costs. And, with a swift stroke of his pen, he arrogantly signs the decrees ordering a full and immediate military mobilization of the entire imperial army. The military advisor turns deathly pale, his eyes widening in sheer terror as he stutters a desperate final warning to his monarch, arguing frantically that the domestic economy is a ticking time bomb, that the treasury is heavily depleted, that the peasantry and factory workers are already on the absolute verge of open, violent revolution, and that entering a massive, industrialized European conflict will completely break the fragile infrastructure of the nation. But Nicholas merely waves his hand dismissively, cutting off the advisor with a cold, patronizing smile as he declares that a short, glorious, and victorious war is exactly the magnificent distraction Russia needs right now to ignite a wave of fierce patriotism, silence the rebellious dissidents, and firmly unite the divided people behind the divine authority of the crown. The Tsar is completely blind to the agonizing irony of his choice, utterly unaware that dragging a starving, technologically backward, and unindustrialized agrarian nation into the brutal meat grinder of World War I would not save his throne, but would instead act as the exact, devastating catalyst needed to shatter the military, collapse the food supply lines, and trigger the unstoppable fury of the 1917 Russian Revolution, ultimately resulting in the violent execution of his family and ending 3 centuries of proud Romanov rule in a single blood-soaked night. Next, we travel across the continents and through time to the heart of East Asia, entering the sprawling labyrinthine complex of the Forbidden City during the height of the Qing dynasty, where the majestic Qianlong Emperor sits grandly upon his ornate golden dragon throne, completely surrounded by towering stacks of beautifully painted porcelain vases, intricate jade carvings, and bolts of the absolute finest shimmering silk imaginable. The atmosphere inside the grand audience hall is heavy with the scent of burning incense and the suffocating weight of centuries of unchanging tradition, creating an environment where the rulers truly believe they sit at the absolute center of the entire universe. Suddenly, the serene silence of the court is broken as a breathless royal official enters, nervously shuffling across the polished marble floors before bowing so low that his forehead literally touches the cold ground, tremblingly presenting an official diplomatic letter sent across the oceans from King George III of Great Britain. The letter politely yet firmly requests the opening of formal trade borders between the two massive empires. And outside the hall, British emissaries wait to present spectacular, cutting-edge Western gifts, including advanced mechanical clocks, miniature steam engine models, highly accurate astronomical globes, and revolutionary scientific instruments. The Qianlong Emperor gazes down from his elevated platform, takes one dismissive look at these marvelous examples of advanced European machinery, and lets out a deep, booming chuckle that echoes through the vast rafters of the throne room. With a careless flick of his wrist, he tosses the historic letter aside onto a pile of paperwork, proudly and loudly stating to his assembled court that the celestial Qing dynasty is entirely self-sufficient, possesses all things in prolific abundance under heaven, and has absolutely no practical use for the strange, gimmicky, manufactured gadgets of outside Western barbarians. The bowing official, breaking out into a cold sweat as he remembers the sheer scale of the British fleet, nervously points out that these so-called barbarians are currently undergoing a massive industrial revolution, rapidly building terrifying ironclad warships and completely modernizing their military tactics. While China continues to rely exclusively on centuries-old traditions, wooden junks, and ancestral matchlock muskets, the emperor merely scoffs at the warning, waving his silken sleeves arrogantly as he formally decrees that China's borders will remain completely closed to foreign commerce, blindly trusting that the empire's ancient cultural greatness and massive stacked population will naturally shield it from any external threat. This supreme, institutionalized arrogance and the deliberate choice of total global isolation became the single catastrophic mistake that doomed their entire civilization. Within just a few decades, the geopolitical balance shifted entirely, and aggressive foreign powers brutally forced their way into the country during the disastrous Opium Wars, completely decimating China's outdated military forces, forcing the signing of humiliating, unequal treaties, and triggering a devastating century of internal rebellions and economic collapse that ultimately culminated in the chaotic overthrow of the last emperor in 1912. Finally, we sail back across the Atlantic to the stormy geopolitics of the 16th century to visit the dark, austere court of King Philip II of the Spanish Empire, who is practically drowning in literal mountains of glittering silver and gold coins. Arriving on massive galleons from the conquered lands of the Americas, inside the stone walls of his royal palace, Philip is laughing maniacally, scooping up giant handfuls of raw silver, and throwing them into the air like confetti while shouting triumphantly to his royal treasurer that Spain is officially the wealthiest and most blessed superpower on earth, capable of buying anything its heart desires. The royal treasurer, however, is furiously scribbling complex economic calculations onto a piece of frayed parchment, his eyes wide with absolute panic as he looks up from his desk and desperately begs the stubborn king to stop his reckless spending. The frantic advisor tries to explain that by continuously flooding the nation's markets with an endless supply of cheap, New World silver without actually developing a productive domestic manufacturing economy. They are triggering a devastating, uncontrollable wave of hyperinflation across the Iberian Peninsula. The treasurer attempts to break down the foundational economic law of supply and demand, explaining that when precious gold and silver are everywhere, they naturally lose their intrinsic value, causing the prices of everyday necessities like bread, meat, and basic leather shoes to skyrocket into the stratosphere for normal Spanish citizens who do not see any of the empire's colonial wealth. Philip completely ignores the dire warning with an arrogant wave of his hand, shouting back that tedious economics is a subject fit only for lowly peasants and merchants, before ordering the treasury to immediately allocate millions of coins to fund even more incredibly expensive, grinding religious wars across Europe because he genuinely believes the silver ships will never stop coming. This single monumental economic mistake, relying entirely on plundered foreign treasure rather than investing in sustainable domestic infrastructure, agriculture, and commerce, doomed the superpower from within. It trapped Spain in a vicious cycle of financial ruin, forcing the crown to shock the world by declaring sovereign bankruptcy multiple times, which utterly shattered its global dominance and left the nation completely broke despite importing a literal ocean of unimaginable wealth.